2014, the so-called referendum on the status of the Donetsk and Luhansk republics was held in the Donbass. Its wording sounded like this: "Do you support the act of state independence of the Donetsk People's Republic?" The next day, the insurgent republics declared independence, but no country in the world recognized this sham. You are watching the program about the ATO. What does the Russian Federation have to do with all this, and how does the confrontation between Ukraine and Russia threaten Europe? A hybrid war follows the path of provocations, to force the enemy to make a mistake and to use force first in order to expose the victim as the aggressor. These are its main goals. Society is always more sympathetic to the defenders than the interventionists. That is why the armed people from the east, while occupying the cities of the Donbass, did not declare the seizure of power, rather the protection of civilians. The symbol of the separatists was the ribbon of St. George, and the choice of such a symbol is not accidental. The idea of splitting the east of Ukraine in favor of the Russian Federation is not new. The first such attempt was made back in 2004, right during the Orange Revolution. On November 26, 2004, the regular session of the Luhansk Oblast Council decided, by a majority vote, to create the so-called autonomous southeastern Ukrainian Republic. The Luhansk deputies appealed to Russian President Vladimir Putin for his support in such efforts. On November 28, 2004, in Severodonetsk, the so-called First All-Ukrainian Congress of Deputies of all levels was held. On its agenda was the creation of the southeastern Ukrainian state in the form of a federal republic with its capital in Kyiv. In fact, it was then proposed to create an analog to the modern-day New Russia. The event was attended by representatives of the Russian Federation, including Moscow's mayor Yuri Lushkov. Kharkiv governor Yevhen Kushnarov gave a vivid and significant speech. From Kharkiv to Kiev, 480 kilometers, and to the border with Russia, 40 kilometers. Arise, vast country, arise for a fight to the death against the dark fascist forces, against the cursed hordes. You should pay attention to the rhetoric. Pro-Russian politicians exploit images of the Second World War, comparing pro-Western Ukraine with Hitler's Germany, and Russian propaganda will call people in the central and western regions of Ukraine nothing other than fascists. In 2004, the Security Service of Ukraine responded swiftly, and a split of the country was avoided. In 2005, after the victory of the Orange Revolution, Viktor Yushchenko became the president of Ukraine. The first steps towards European integration were made. At the time of Yushchenko, the Ukrainian Institute of National Memory was created. Its task was to restore the true history of Ukraine. Much attention was paid to political repressions and the Holodomor of the 1930s, as well as the rehabilitation of soldiers of the Ukrainian insurgent army, who fought both against the German troops and against the Soviet army. By his decree, Yushchenko officially recognized members of the Ukrainian insurgent army as fighters for Ukraine's independence. At the same time, in that very same year of 2005, the St. George Ribbon movement appeared in Russia as the symbol of the struggle against Nazism and victory in the Second World War. Russian propaganda vigorously cultivated the myth of the greatness and prosperity of the USSR, calling for the re-establishment of the Union. Political scientists brought up revanchist sentiments in society, diverting its attention from pressing internal problems. Russian media started preparations no less than 10 years before the start of the Russo-Ukrainian War. They painted an image of a terrible Ukrainian, a bandit, punisher, traitor, or accomplice of the German troops. News and books cultivated dislike and even hatred for everything Ukrainian. However, in the dramatic year of 2014, Russian-speaking citizens also rose to defend Ukraine, its integrity and independence. Back then, overnight into May 1st, Kyiv hosted exercises. 10 armored vehicles blocked the government quarter. The snipers took up positions on the rooftops, and the special forces entered the parliament building. Their training target was to practice possible scenarios of countering the takeover of public buildings. In the east of the country, the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine announced its demands to militants, namely, hand over your weapons, release all the hostages, and vacate all seized public buildings. The authorities even announced their readiness to amnesty for the participants in the confrontation who did not commit serious crimes. On the morning of May 2, 2014, Ukrainian security forces attacked the checkpoints of separatists on the outskirts of Slavyansk. The first one was a checkpoint in the village of Bilbasivka and a television center on Mount Karachun. As a result of the battle, 2 Mi-24 helicopters were lost. One was shot down from a man-portable air defense system, MANPADS, and the second by guided anti-tank missile, which in and of itself speaks of the very high skills of the sniper. Of the 6 helicopter crewmen, 5 died. 1 helicopter man was wounded and taken prisoner. The first captured checkpoint, number 3, near Slavyansk, together with the Jaguar and Omega units. My company captured this checkpoint, and right away, literally the next day, we stormed and captured the checkpoint 3A. Through this intersection went the largest supply line of the terrorists, which was a connection with Krasny Liman. It was a strategic intersection, which they really did not want to lose. The terrain did not help us conduct normal military operations. Around the reeds and hills, there are slag heaps on the left. The town is literally 250 meters away. There was a lot of movement activity at that time. Slavyansk was not yet blocked, and people drove in and left. There were market days, and all this was accompanied by mortar shelling, starting at 6 in the morning and lasting the whole day, at least 4 bombardments every day.
Так, блокпост пережив повні 2 оточення з 4 сторін, так, з висадкою піхоти і з боями. Дуже хотіли вони
The checkpoint survived 2 complete encirclements, with infantry attacks and constant machine guns firing. They really wanted to take this post back. They needed a way to cross the Liman. I remember the moment when a KAMAZ truck, which supplied us with ammunition, was ambushed. The brakes were damaged by a bullet, and the KAMAZ pulling down from the bridge directly collided with a gas station barrel. The driver ripped a hole in his leg, a civilian driver.
Бочка перевернулася 2 рази, водій з пораненою, з пробитою ногою, якби цивільний причому.
On the same day, on May 2nd, severe clashes took place in Odessa. Pro-Russian activists attacked the so-called Unity March of the football fans, which preceded the match. The militants were wearing masks, had gloves, chains, shields, and also firearms, including Kalashnikov assault rifles. Pro-Ukrainian activist Andriy Birykov was fatally wounded by a military-grade 5.45 mm caliber bullet. The militants had help in the form of the deputy chief of the Odessa region main directorate of the police and the head of the civil security police, Colonel Dmitry Fuchadji, which is why the police subordinated to him. They tolerated the anti-Maidan activists and did not even try to disarm them. As a result of the confrontations, the football ultras that guarded the march clashed with the attackers and pushed them towards the Kulikove Pole, the square on which the tents of the local anti-Maidan protesters were located. With the support of passers-by and the townspeople who arrived voluntarily, the pro-Ukrainian activists swept away the camp of the anti-Maidan, dispersing its inhabitants. Some pro-Russian activists took refuge in the House of Trade Unions. They fired back with weapons of various types and threw Molotov cocktails. Around 7:40 p.m., a fire began in the building of the House of Trade Unions, which was accompanied by the release of a large amount of smoke. At this time, pro-Russian militants continued to shoot from the windows of the building. However, at 7:54 p.m., the fire increased sharply. It is likely that the fire reached the Molotov cocktail fuel supply. Fire and poisoning with carbon monoxide killed 30 people. The total number of victims of clashes in Odessa on May 2nd was 48 deaths. More than 200 people were injured and about 20 were put in jail. The head of the civil security police, Dmitry Fuchadji, fled to Transnistria. Thus, the Russian world ended in Odessa. And now the city is again full of undisturbed tourists. Overnight into May 3rd, a crowd of unarmed people blocked the convoy of the Ukrainian army. Hiding behind the backs of the civilians, militants opened fire on the soldiers. As a result of this battle, 2 soldiers and 10 separatists were killed. On the morning of May 4th, the insurgents said they regained control over Kramatorsk. The fighting continued. Igor Gherkin, the militant commander, understood that the high point was perfectly suited for observation and spotting. Therefore, the separatists sought to recover this key point. The same day, a video from the so-called Mariupol rebels appeared on the internet. They stated that they were advancing to help in the Battle of Slavyansk. In the very city of Mariupol, mass distribution of leaflets was organized with a call to support the state independence of the DPR. On May 5th, the fighting near Slavyansk resumed once more. As a result of the firefights in the Semenivka micro-district, the Ukrainian army lost 4 fighters. About 20 separatists were killed. An advantage in heavy armaments and aviation support came into play. In turn, the Ukrainian Air Force destroyed the armored train of rebels assembled from civilian freight wagons. Unlike the Slavyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration, Mariupol lived relatively peacefully. The militants clearly had insufficient numbers to fully control the city. On May 6th, there was a shootout in the area of the local airport. Unknown people fired at several vehicles. At the same time, separatists set up a checkpoint on the Mariupol-Yalta highway and set up tires at barricades near the city council. In the evening, near the checkpoint in the area of Manhush village, a clash took place as a result of the battle. The so-called defense minister of the DPR, Ihor Harkimzianov, was captured. Overnight into May 7th, separatists voluntarily left the building of the city council of Mariupol, and in the morning Interior Minister Arsen Avakov said that the city was freed from separatists. The barricades near the city council were disassembled with the help of pro-Ukrainian activists. At noon, the separatists took over the building of the city council again, as the police lifted the guard. By the end of the day, entrance to the city was blocked by 10 checkpoints, at which police and pro-Ukrainian activists were on duty. The armed forces equipment moved up to the city. Meanwhile, both preparation for the referendum and opposition to its holding took place on May 8th. The same day, in Donetsk, uncontrollable distribution of ballots among local residents began. 9, unprecedented security measures were taken in Kyiv. Residents were advised to avoid crowded places and to be vigilant. After the events in Odessa, all the available forces, including a large number of freelancers and volunteers, were engaged in order to protect the rule of law. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that the deputies of the Party of Regions, the Communist Party, and other pro-Russian politicians organized the laying of flowers in the Park of Glory. They demonstratively decorated themselves with Georgian ribbons. It was an outright provocation. Journalists of the pro-Russian media waited for mass riots, nationalists beating veterans of the Second World War, but apart from the fact of apprehension of 2 vehicles with weapons, the day passed without incidents. That same day, at around 10 a.m., a few vehicles appeared near the Mariupol Internal Affairs Directorate. People in civilian clothing, wearing masks and carrying weapons, came out of the vehicles. Under the cover of snipers, they launched an attack on the Directorate building. The situation was aggravated by the fact that at the same time there was a May 9th rally and there were a lot of civilians in the streets. Some of the policemen resisted and a shootout began. In order to support the police blocked in the building, military of the 72nd Brigade and units of the National Guard of Ukraine entered the city. However, security officials faced a problem. Disoriented civilians were blocking the movement of military vehicles. Some of them went towards the soldiers with raised hands, and then the terrorists opened fire directly from behind the unarmed people. After removing the militants from the Internal Affairs Directorate building, the military vehicles left the city. They were ordered to leave the city to avoid significant casualties among the civilian population, which was literally falling under the vehicles, and some people ended up in the lines of fire. Public mind control, intentional misinformation, and an astute manipulation of facts had their effect. That gave birth to the legend of mass shootings of civilians in Mariupol. The Russian mass media announced a figure of 50 dead and duplicated various ridiculous rumors. The real number of civilian victims was no more than 4 people.
Donbass, Россия, мать с тобой, вставай, Donbass, ты станешь новым Брестом.
On May 11th, a referendum was held in Donetsk, Luhansk, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Mariupol, and other separatist-controlled cities. According to the statements of the so-called CEC of the DPR, the turnout of voters was just under 75%. However, none of the international organizations, including the OSCE and the Council of Europe, had sent their official observers. As such, these figures are very dubious. Even Russia did not send observers. It limited itself to making a statement about respect for the results of the referendum. On May 12, 2014, the terrorist leader Igor Girkin accepted the office of commander of the armed forces of the self-proclaimed DPR and announced the start of a counter-terrorist operation regime. He also appealed to the president of Russia to support the so-called militia. Speaking directly, he requested the support of a regular army. It was then that the hybrid war rapidly turned into a real war.